We'll be live in just a few minutes, just a minute or so. One, two, three. One, two, three. All right, I think that's right. What's going on here? We'll be starting in just a second. Almost there, almost there. Come on. There we go. Sorry guys, just a few technical issues on the road here. All right, I think we're good. Let me just see if I can pull up the, where did I have the chat thing? That's it, all right. All right, I think we're good. Hi everybody, and welcome to Yaron Brook Show. I guess as I travel around the world, you get a bit of a view of the hotel rooms I stay at. I am now in Marbella, Spain, so it's beautiful here. It really is gorgeous. So southern Spain, like southern France, you know, I love the Mediterranean. Grew up on the Mediterranean, and it really is fabulous. So if you guys ever have a chance to visit here, it's beautiful. I was at a wedding last night. Wow, I've never been to a wedding like this. Never in my life, and 600 people, destination wedding. They came from all over the world. An Israeli company put this on. Just spectacular. The Jewish wedding itself was pretty straightforward, but the party, man, the day party. I've never seen people party as much as I left at 1 o'clock or 1:30. I think I was the first person to leave the place. People hung around, and it was crazy, and it was really, really intense. Went to Rwanda today. I don't know if you've ever been to Rwanda, Spain. Wow, again, views, magnificent views. Man, I'm thinking maybe one day after Puerto Rico, I'll have to buy a nice house here on one of the hills and overlooking the Mediterranean, overlooking the Rock of Gibraltar, because you can see the Rock of Gibraltar from here, and just retire here. Not a bad place, not a bad place at all. A lot of Brits here, you can tell. A lot of Brits have bought homes here and are retired here. Tomorrow I go to Granada, where the famous palace Alhambra, the famous Moorish palace is. It's magnificent. I was there years ago. I'm going to go to Granada, and I'm speaking at the University of Granada. So mixing in a little bit of work together with the party, with the wedding. I did not officiate at the wedding. It was very much a traditional Jewish wedding, at least up until they got married, and then the partying started. The partying was not Jewish, I can tell you that. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't Jewish. It was all out crazy, fun, pagan celebration. All right, so that's me in Spain. That's why I haven't been on here doing more shows. I apologize, but I've been traveling. It's a little tough on the road to get these shows in. The other thing about Spain, my favorite thing about Spain probably is the food. I mean, I like really nice restaurants. And I went the night before last, before the wedding, and then tonight I went to a one Michelin star restaurant. Saturday I went to a two Michelin star restaurant. Wow, best food in the world is in the top restaurants in Spain. They just blow you out of the water in terms of the quality of the food, interesting food, fascinating food, good stuff. Somebody's asking about El Bulli. El Bulli's closed, so I never got a chance to eat at El Bulli. But I love that kind of food, the kind of food they made in El Bulli. I love going to restaurants of students or people who worked in El Bulli, or people who's trained in El Bulli, or people inspired by them. So, and there are tons of them in Spain. So, best restaurant, best food, high-end food, expensive food, but best in the world is in Spain. All right, enough of my all of that. I'm getting excited about Ocon. Ocon is in just a couple of weeks. Hopefully, many of you are coming. I look forward to seeing you all at Ocon. It's going to be fast. I'm actually doing at least two events in Ocon. One is, I guess somebody's interviewing me. I don't even know who the guy is, but somebody's interviewing me. Did kind of a live interview on stage, and that should be interesting. And then I'm giving a talk on how to be a rational optimist. And that's going to be fun and interesting and hard, and maybe the hardest talk I've ever given. Ocon is the Objectivist Conference. Every year, typically in late June, early July, but it varies a little bit. There is a conference of objectivists, so on objectivism, and we get about 500 people at the conference. It's a blast, really, really intense and varied program. And you can look it all up. Just look ocon2018.com, I think, ocon2018.com. You can also look it up on Facebook. And it's fantastic. You spend 5 days, 6 days, taking courses, taking classes, schmoozing with people, talking to people, and everybody there kind of shares your values. And it's like being in Galt's Gulch for a couple of weeks. The Galt's Gulch from Atlas Shrugged. I'm not going to say more, just in case some of you haven't read Atlas Shrugged. So if you still can make it, the URL is actually ocon, ocon.aynrand.org, ocon.aynrand.org. And of course, if you're in southern Spain for whatever reason, and you can make it tomorrow to Granada, come over to Granada and watch the show. I promise to put on a good show. All right, let's see. We've got Super Chat going, so if you want to ask a question, feel free to do so. I have a few things I want to cover. Basically, what I want to do today, because I don't want to talk too much about the news. There really is nothing much new. I want to say a couple of things about trade quickly. I know some of you are just sick and tired of me talking about trade. So I want to say a couple of quick things about trade. And I'm not going to say anything about the meeting with North Korea, because that is, I've said all I have to say about that stupidity. So let me say a few things about trade, and then what I want to do is over the last few weeks I've been getting a bunch of questions from on Twitter, and these are primarily from new people who are new to the philosophy, new to objectivism, new to me. So I thought I'd just cover some of these questions. Some of them are questions I've covered in the past, but I think they all have general interest. So I'm going to go over some of them, and then of course we'll open it up to the super chats. If you guys want to ask anything on super chat, then go ahead and do that. That always gets priority. So let me see. Yeah, what did I want to say about trade? I want to say a couple of things about trade. So it kind of looks like maybe Donald Trump said at some point, hey, let's all lower tariffs and let's all eliminate subsidies. It's not clear that he said that, but and I doubt he means that. But yeah, that would be great. That'd be great. But the way to get that and the way to achieve that is not by increasing tariffs and increasing subsidies, which is what the United States is doing. It's not by having a massive farm bill that massively subsidizes farming. It's not by having tariffs on steel and aluminum and 1,000 other things. It's actually by unilaterally acting by example, by eliminating all subsidies and at the same time eliminating all tariffs coming into the United States. Or since we don't have a national sales tax, we should not have a tariff tax. If you want to tax consumption, then have a national sales tax, but don't tax some consumption and not other consumption. So that's the best way to achieve the goal, because what will happen is the United States will become the most competitive, the most exciting, the most the freest, most dynamic economy, particularly and importantly, if we also decrease regulations. Decrease regulation, eliminate them to the extent possible, or to the extent feasible, I guess, politically. Eliminate, not reduce, eliminate all subsidies, eliminate all tariffs, and watch this economy take off, out of control. And then the world will look at us and say, ooh, wow, surprise. Free markets work. Who would have thought? That's new. Never worked before, right? And they will emulate us. They will emulate us. That's the way to do it. It's not to threaten tariffs. So somebody wrote, I saw, I think, on one of maybe Amy Peikoff's Twitter posts, somebody wrote, oh yeah, reduce tariffs while we're in a trade war. So let's be clear. There's no such thing as a trade war, right? War's a thing with tanks and bombs and missiles and you blow stuff up. That's a war. You don't have wars on poverty. There is no such thing as a war on poverty. It is a disgusting misnomer, and it is stupid, and the consequence are that nobody knows what the hell we're doing with regard to poverty. There's no such thing as a war on drugs. You're just violating individual rights on a massive scale. You're just pretending there's a war, but you can't have a war on an inanimate object. You can't have a war on a thing. You have war against people, against a country, and business' war is absurd. Of course, business is not war. Business is about win-win relationships. War is explicitly about win-lose. The whole point of a war is to make the other side lose. Actually, war is about lose-lose, because the fact is that wars are lose-lose propositions. They're not win-win propositions. So business and war are the exact opposite, There's nothing similar between war and business. They're the exact opposite. Business is about creating win-win relationships. War is about creating lose-lose relationships. All you want to make sure is that the other side loses more than you do. But you cannot win in a war in a sense of benefit, because people die. Productive resources get allocated towards destructive activities, like blowing stuff up, like building tanks, like things like that. So lose-lose. Wars are lose-lose. Business is win-win. There is no war. There is no trade war. This is how this trade quote war works. We shoot ourselves in the foot. So our so-called enemy shoots themselves in the knee. So we shoot ourselves in the hip. So our so-called enemy shoots itself in the in its chest. The so-called trade war is true. It's lose-lose, but it's like a competition who can lose more. It's like instead of in a war you're trying to make the other party lose more than you, In a trade so-called war, you're trying to lose more than your enemy. So you raise tariffs, which is a tax on yourself, and you lose from it. And then the idiots on the other side raise tariffs over theirs. They raise taxes on their own people, so they lose even more than you lose. And then so you respond to that by raising taxes even higher on your own people, so you lose even more than they lost. And it's a lose, 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 lose ad infinitum. It is the stupidest, dumbest thing I've ever heard. And it's not a war. It's trade suicide would be a better, it's economic, I don't know. Who can cripple their economy faster? Us or China? Let's go. Or us or Canada? Let's go. Who can raise tariffs faster? Anyway, and of course, I've already talked about the fact that this is all in the guise of national security. And the reason it's in the guise of national security is that allows Trump to do things without getting the approval of Congress. And the idea that Canada and Mexico and Brazil and the EU are national security threats to the United States is a joke and absurd and ridiculous. And again, this is the kind of stupidity that having this trade mindset results in. So I just wanted to say that about trade war. There's no such thing as a trade war. It's a race to the bottom. It's not a race to the top. It's not a race to defeat the other side. It's a race to defeat yourself. It's completely, the best thing China could do in response to us raising tariffs is to lower tariffs. Yep. To teach us a lesson about free markets. That would be cool. I'm still, my fantasy is that China will get so pissed off at the United States that it will go on a gold standard, privatize its banking sector, and reduce tariffs to zero to penalize the United States. And that will accelerate Chinese growth beyond anything imaginable and basically make its economy stronger and more powerful than the United States. Okay, here's a super chat question, and then I'll go to the Twitter questions. Is airport security the job of government? And in general, is security, government or private property, of this nature under the scope of government? The answer to that is no. No in the case of airports. Airport security should be run by the airports or by the airlines. They have the incentive. It's they can do the risk assessment. The job of government is to provide these private businesses with intelligence that only it can gain because it has an intelligence apparatus, to provide them with whatever information the government can get about potential threats. So I don't know if the threat is, they're now shoe bombers. People are using shoes or underwear or whatever it is to develop bombs. They should be providing that information to to the security, the private airport security forces. But it's the responsibility of the airport. Now, if there are known terrorists that are going to be in a particular place at a particular time, then of course it's the job of government to step in and take care of those terrorists. It's ultimately it's the government's responsibility to take the terrorists out. It's the government's responsibility to take the and that would be the police or the FBI. So, is there a difference between domestic and international security? Well, there is no such thing really. I don't know what international security is. All security should be domestic. That is, the purpose of the U.S. government is to protect the individual rights of Americans, their property and their lives. So everything that the government does should be focused on protecting our lives from physical threats. But for the government to be involved, there has to be a real viable threat. And just normal security in an airport can be done by airport security, by private businesses. And if a particular airline doesn't want to have security, they take the risk, the customer take the risks. Again, unless there is an explicit threat where just like the FBI or the police would get involved if somebody thought there was going to be a murder committed, and then the police would show up to take care of the murderer. But you don't have police roadblocks everywhere in order to protect us from potential, maybe there'll be a murderer. Now, given that there's a general threat on airplanes, you could imagine that it's in the business interest of both the airlines and the airports to have security there. But they should have the option not to have security, and it should be up to us as consumers to decide what kind of risk we want to take. Again, unless there's an explicit, specific threat. So I think that answers, this is private property. It's securing private property. The police should get involved in securing private property from a threat from an international source, but only once that threat is explicit and manifest. All right. Somebody said something here. China, let me tell you, China is the producer, US is the buyer. In a free market, the buyer has all the power. China will never screw over their best client. I mean, that's true, but it's not even true that China is the producer and US is the buyer. China is the producer, US is the producer, because if we didn't produce something, we couldn't buy anything. And if we weren't an attractive place for China to be investing its money, they wouldn't sell us stuff, because in exchange for the stuff they sell us, they get dollars. They wouldn't want those dollars unless they wanted to invest those dollars back in America. Actually, I would suspect that the causal impact is the opposite. The causal impact is China wants to invest in the United States. It has large savings. The Chinese are savers. We're not. We're consumers. So the Chinese have savings. So in order to get dollars, in order to invest in the United States, then they have to export to us. So they export to us, and they don't buy our stuff. Instead, they invest in us. But either way, we're benefiting dramatically. All right, another super chat. Hi, Yaron. Since you're in Spain, I would love to hear your thoughts on Aristotelian influence on the so-called golden age of Islam. I mean, yeah. I mean, I've spoken about this in the past. It's part of my history of the Middle East course, which I strongly encourage everybody to take. It's a really valuable, short, I think 5 hours history of the Middle East. You can get it as on my podcast, or any podcast app. Just look for History of the Middle East on iTunes, or on under my name in my podcast, or on any Stitcher, on any podcasting app. You can find it. So even though those of you on YouTube, it's not on YouTube because it's audio only, but it is on the podcasting app. So I encourage you to go and download one of those apps. And I talk about it. The fact is that the Arabs became a civilization when they discovered the Greek writings, when they basically occupied Byzantine and found these massive libraries in Byzantine, and all these scholars, Christian scholars at the time, who many of them converted to Islam, Christian scholars who were studying the Greeks, and among them, most importantly, studying Aristotle. And the Muslims were seeking to be civilized, and they took over these libraries and they started studying the books. And the largest libraries in the 10th, 11th, 12th centuries were in Baghdad, in Iraq, in the world, and the best libraries. And it was all these texts translated from Greek into Arabic. And then in the 13th, 14th, possibly even 15th centuries, but certainly 13th and 14th centuries, the largest libraries in the world were here in Andalusia, in southern Spain, under the Moorish influence. The Arabs, well, they're not Arabs, they were Moors, but Muslims. And the largest libraries in the world were here. The best libraries in the world were here. Again, in Arabic, all the Greek texts. And it's those libraries that the Christians, when they took back southern Spain, took southern Spain from the Moors, that they discovered these libraries. And this time, counter to what the Christians did in Alexandria, they didn't burn the library. They actually saved it, translated the texts into Latin, and got them to the libraries in Paris and in Rome, where people like Averroes, not Averroes, what's the philosopher in Paris's name? I forget. But that's how Thomas Aquinas in Rome ultimately got a hold of Aristotle. But during the golden age of Islam, the 10th, 11th, 12th century, it was amazing. There were philosophers, there were Aristotelian philosophers, again, even into the 13th century here in Andalusia, there were Jewish philosophers, Muslim philosophers, but all influenced by Aristotle. There were massive debates. It's a very, very, very scholarly time. They're trying to bring together faith and reason. What do you live by, and how do you combine the two, and how do you live by both? And it was a very, very powerful period. Medicine, like the circulatory blood, the idea of the blood circulating was known during this period, was discovered by an Arab physician. It took the Western world hundreds of years before they came to the same conclusion. Kind of the Western world. And mathematics, the number zero, for example, was a discovery of the Indians, but the Muslims adopted it from India, and they conquered India, and they brought it in. Double book entry accounting, certain elements in algebra. So there was a real golden age of Islam. So I don't buy those who want to revise history and revise the golden age of Islam out of existence. It's just not true. All you have to do is go and study and read the Muslim philosophers of the period, the Muslim historians of the period, the mathematicians, the scientists, the doctors. It truly was. Now, there was always a tension, just like there was in Christendom after Aquinas, between those who pursued science and pursued knowledge and pursued reason, and those who pursued faith, and those who stuck to religion, and religion was the standard for everything. And that held them back. And ultimately, different than Christendom, in the Muslim world, faith won. So Al-Ghazali, the famous Muslim philosopher, went into the desert, came back, says, I've solved the problem between faith and reason. Out with reason, we should stick with faith and commit ourselves to the Quran. And that's the end of the golden age of Islam. So that is the end of it. But in the West, luckily, the same conflict occurs, and the Enlightenment basically comes down unequivocally on the side of reason, and basically relegates faith to a small portion of human life. And it's Immanuel Kant, who tries to resurrect faith and tries to destroy reason. And you could argue that he succeeds, but he doesn't succeed quite as thoroughly as Al-Ghazali does. And, the theme of my why to be a rational optimist is the state of the world is not as bad as people think, is that the Enlightenment is still alive and well, at least practically, in the lives of, in many of our lives in the world out there. Not just in the United States, but all over Asia and all over the world. There is a real sense of Enlightenment values. There's a real adoption of Enlightenment values. And even so Kant won for a while, but he never was able to completely destroy those Enlightenment values. And because they're so successful, they're so powerful, they're so true. The idea of reason and individualism, that's what I take as the Enlightenment values, reason and individualism, that they're all over the world, they're everywhere. Even in our tribal age that we live in today, when you ask a group of people anywhere in the world, who does their life belong to? 200 years ago, they would have said, well, the king, the aristocrat, whatever, the tribe, the nation, the state, the religion, the God. And today, uniformly, you go over the world, you ask people, who does your life belong to? And they say, well, to me, of course. Now, they're still wrong about a lot of other things, and they're still tribal in many ways, but there's a core, there's an essence of individualism that is spread around the world and is anchored in the souls of people like never before in human history. And so, that should give us a little bit of sense of optimism. Yeah, there's a good somebody, Ken recommends on Facebook. Barry Wood has a lecture series on the ARI Easter. It's called The Battle Over Reason in the Islamic World and How It Was Lost. And it's very good. I think, I haven't heard it, but I like Barry, and it strikes me that this is consistent. His view is consistent with mine, that there was this true golden age, and it was tragically, horribly lost. But of course, it was really just transmitted through this part of the world, right here, Marbella and Malaga, and Seville, and all these places. It was transmitted through the libraries that existed here. It was transmitted into the Christian world, and ultimately resulted in a Renaissance and a Reformation and an Enlightenment. Yeah, somebody mentions the University in Alexandria, but remember that the University of Alexandria in Egypt was burnt, right? The books were burnt. The library was burnt. So, all right. Could Islam use a reformation like in Christianity? Well, I don't think it's a reformation, because I don't think the essential for Christianity was a reformation. The essential for Christianity was the Renaissance, and then ultimately the Enlightenment. So what the Enlightenment is what's important. So what Islam really needs is the Enlightenment. What Islam really needs is because Islam never had in a sense, a Catholic Church with the Pope who communes with God and nobody else does. The relationship of the individual to God, like in Protestantism, is between the individual and God. In Islam, just like it is in Protestantism. So Reformation doesn't help. Reformation, indeed, Martin Luther and Calvin were horrible, just disgusting philosophies, and they were fanatics. So no. What Islam needs is an enlightenment. What Islam needs is the relegation of religion to a person's private life in their home or in their church, and that in their public life, in science, knowledge, politics, everything other aspect, religion has no place. This is the greatness of the Enlightenment. That it in everything in our public lives, and everything important in our lives, and everything that relates to knowledge, certainly, right? It is reason that is the guide, and religion may. I mean, unfortunately, religion is responsible for morality. Religion is responsible for your personal life, what you do at home, which is sad, because I think that cripples and ultimately lays the foundation for the destruction of the Enlightenment. But it's a huge step forward, So what Islam needs is an enlightenment, and of course all the tools are there. And at the edges, at the very edges of Islam, you can see this. You can see it in the assimilation of some Muslims in American society. You can see it in the assimilation of some Muslims in England. Some, I said, not all, not even a majority, unfortunately. It looks like it's even in places like Egypt. Even some intellectuals in Saudi Arabia, and other places where they are secular, and they have abandoned the idea of religion guiding every aspect of their life, in everything in their life, where they basically have relegated religion to where it belongs. So there's no reason Islam could not go through an enlightenment. It just needs the energy, it needs the thinkers, it needs the intellectuals, it needs the real leaders, in order to achieve that. It's very, 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 very difficult. Oh my God, where did that come from? Milo says Christians have the best sex because they think it's dirty. How can the best sex be when you think it's dirty and you're filled with guilt? That's complete upside down. To have good sex, you have to have guilt-free sex. You have to believe that sex is not dirty, because you don't want to, unless your kicks are running around and sloshing around in the mud. No, you have to believe it's beautiful and wonderful and amazing, and everything you do in sex is beautiful and amazing, even the so-called dirty stuff. How does one reform Islam, since it says that 91 verses of the Quran say that every Muslim is to follow the perfect example of Muhammad? How do you do that? I leave that to Muslim theologians, but there's lots of Muslims out there who do not follow the perfect example of Muhammad, and there are lots of verses in the Old Testament and New Testament that would be that modern Christians and modern Jews would find horrific and wouldn't want to have anything to do with. And what they do is they interpret them out of existence. They create such lavish, bizarre interpretations that they don't matter. But not every Muslim marries 9-year-olds. Not every Muslim decapitates Jewish heads. There are plenty of secular Muslims that do not follow the example of Muhammad. So just like most Christians don't follow the example of Jesus Christ, and most Jews don't follow the example of Moses and the rest of the barbaric tribe that roamed the desert and slaughtered people left and right. Yaron, what are your thoughts on land value tax replacing the income tax? I'm against a land value tax. I don't see why land should be penalized. If you're going to replace the income tax, I would replace it with some kind of consumption tax. But you'd have to replace it. You'd have to do away with the income tax, eliminate you have a constitutional amendment that makes the income tax go away, or do away with the amendment that made the income tax constitutional, and then pass a consumption tax. So you'd have to do one before the other, because otherwise we'll get both. What do you think about mandating insurance companies to charge people with pre-existing issues the same as regular healthy people? Well, obviously that's bizarre and stupid. That's not insurance. Don't call them insurance companies. Call them redistribution companies. So you've got to charge people insurance based on the risk that they face, based on the risk that you face as an insurer. So pre-existing conditions should be out. The problem is, and I noticed that the Trump administration is trying to eliminate that provision from Obamacare. The problem is that you can't do this piecemeal. If you just take out pieces of Obamacare, then insurance markets are going to collapse. And when insurance markets collapse, who do you think they're going to blame? They're going to blame the free market. They're going to blame capitalism. They're going to blame all this stuff, and they're going to want to replace it with single-payer universal health care. The solution is a massive privatization of healthcare, complete healthcare reform, real reform that moves, that eliminates regulations on insurance companies, that frees up the insurance industry to be competitive, to offer products that cover pre-existing condition, to offer insurance against pre-existing condition, to offer all kinds of various types of products, to allow people to really shop for insurance. And unless you have that, then you're just creating problems and problems and problems, and the end result is going to be, again, that the markets will collapse, and the blame will be on the private markets, and the solution will be single-payer universal health care. So the Justice Department and the Trump administration is doing us no favors by piecemeal doing away with Obamacare. The way to deal with Obamacare is to replace it. I'm not for just doing away with it, because there are real problems in the healthcare markets, but to replace it with true free market reform, to truly privatize healthcare and get the government out primarily of the insurance market, but also of telling doctors what they can charge and how they can charge and what treatments are okay, and what, this evidence-based medicine, which is nothing but, that the government is not pushing on doctors, and everything else that the government is pushing on doctors. Get the government out of healthcare. And that's complicated, because government is in healthcare because it's funding Medicare and Medicaid. So the way to deal with that is to convert Medicare and Medicaid in the short run into voucher programs. So let's say you can't eliminate them. That's just, you can't eliminate them in the short run. So turn them into voucher programs, thus creating, again, robust insurance markets in the private sector to cover those risks. Do that for Medicare, do that for Medicaid, and get the government the hell out of trying to run healthcare at all. And that's not what Trump is doing. So I fear that what the so-called deregulation that Trump is doing in the healthcare space is actually going to lead us to a crisis, because the insurance markets are so heavily regulated they can't adapt to the changes the Trump administration is making. And as a consequence, we will have a crisis, and as I said, the solution will be universal health care. And I wouldn't be surprised if that solution is offered by Republicans at the time. All right, you can continue to ask questions on YouTube if you use the super chat. I'll just answer this question about Islam. So you don't share some authors' view that Islam is internally more violent than Christianity. Well, I mean, it's not. Yes, Islam core religion is more violent than Christianity, and there's a reason for that. But historically, by the way, Christians have killed probably more people per capita than Muslims. If not, then it's pretty close. The 30-year war, the 100-year war in Christendom, unbelievable proportions of populations were slaughtered. Now the Muslims have their share, particularly in India. India is probably the most brutal place in terms of what the Muslims did, in terms of killing people. But Europe in the 15th through the 17th century, wow, it was pretty brutal. But let me just say, why is Islam more internally violent? I've talked about this elsewhere as well. But look, Islam is a religion of success. Islam is a religion born of success. Its religious founder did not sacrifice himself on a cross for everybody else's sins. He would have done nothing of the sort. He was a confident, arrogant businessman and a warrior. So he was rich. Islam is pro-sex on the male side, not on the female side, because Muhammad had lots of wives. I mean, religion of their founders. So they don't have like the anti-sex attitude that Christianity does, because hey, Muhammad had lots of sex, and he made a lot of money. Islam actually has a much more positive view of profit than Christianity does, because again, the founder was a merchant. He was a businessman. He was a trader, and he became rich. Towards the end of his life, he was really rich. And on top of that, he was a warrior, and he went out there and conquered places, and he was very, very successful. So Islam, and this is what makes it difficult to defeat, and why it is such a so violent, is that it's a religion born of success. From the first years of Islam, it is conquering, and it is spreading, it is gaining adherents, and it is growing in power and growing in influence and growing in money, and in a tribal society from which Islam came, this tribe was unbelievably successul. And then within 100, 200 years, it's the largest empire maybe in human history, or one of the largest in human history, going all the way to India, and all the way in the east, and all the way west to Spain, and into the north, into southern Europe, southern Central Europe. So Islam from the beginning was violent and successful. But again, it also has the attribute of being relatively pro-business, relatively, in a superficial sense, right? Relatively pro-sex in a superficial sense, and the opposite of Christianity. Now think about Christianity. Christianity is a religion born of persecution. It's a minority. It's politically has no power. Jesus dies on a cross for other people's sins. It's a religion of sacrifice. It's a religion with no self-esteem. Islam has this idea of, we can conquer the world. Allah's on our side. Christianity's like, we'll help the meek and we'll help the poor, and the meek shall inherit the earth. So ultimately we will win because they're more poor people than anybody else. And that's true, right? They cultivate the poor in Rome, and when Roman economy turns really, really bad, more and more people convert to Christianity, and ultimately they take over. And then they really take over when Constantine adopts Christianity and gives it a sword, gives it violence, right? He makes it part of the Eastern Roman Empire, and that's when Christianity really takes off. But think about the origins of Christianity. It's meek, it's pathetic, it's weak. So they hate sex. Ultimately, Jesus was born from a virgin. So God forbid, Jesus would be born from an act of sex. So you have an antagonism towards sex. You have original sin. You have antagonism towards wealth creation. It's harder for a rich man to go to heaven than a camel to go through a needle. You have, they're not really traders. They're more beggars. And of course, the one good thing about Christianity, right? To God unto God and to Caesar unto Caesar, kind of an implicit separation of church and state, is a complete accident. It's a consequence of the fact that Christians are so weak that they can't actually challenge Caesar. So they say, look, we can't challenge Caesar, so give him what's his. We'll focus on God. So we'll be spiritual. We won't be this worldly. So, so Christianity is much more antagonistic towards money than Islam. Islam is not at all antagonistic towards money. It's just not true. Muslims are expected to do charity, but they're also expected to make money. They're expected to be wealthy. Again, Muhammad was wealthy. The Prophet was wealthy. And Christianity is very antagonistic towards wealth, towards power, towards success. Everybody condemns usurers. So somebody said it's contradiction. It's praise of commerce, but denunciation of usurers. But everybody was against usurers. Jews against usurers, particularly usurers within the Jewish community. Christianity is against usury. Islam is against usury, and Aristotle was against usury. So usury and money lending have always been, in those ancient civilizations, there was no understanding of usury. There was no understanding of the role of money. Read my essay on the moral case for usury and the moral and historical the history. Yeah, it's Stuart. Thanks for asking the question, Stuart, or making the comment. So I don't consider being antagonistic to usury being antagonistic to money, because everybody was antagonistic to usury. There was no understanding of its role. There was no understanding of the place of banking. So again, Christianity and Judaism have evolved, and now they're not against interest. Islam, because it never went through enlightenment, is still stuck on its antagonism to usury. Not because that's what it says in the Quran, but the Bible is anti-usury. We just ignore it. Christians ignore it. I mean, until the 19th century, late in the 19th century, the Catholic Church viewed usury as a mortal sin. What happened exactly in the 19th century? They come down and have a chat with the Pope and tell him, oh, you misinterpreted the Bible, which is every word is true in it. Every single word is true. So did God change his mind? Does it turn out the word of the Bible is not actually true? What happened? So we know what happened. The church had to catch up with the ways of the world. What happened was the Enlightenment, and people stopped caring about what the Pope said and what Christians said. They if it made sense, they did it. Okay, Brandon has a film recommendation, Kurosawa's Ikiru. Great message about individualism and harms of bureaucracy. Yes, I saw that movie, I don't know, 30 years ago at least. And yes, it's a very good movie, I agree. I love Kurosawa's work. I'm a huge Kurosawa fan. I love one of my favorite movies, Kagemusha. I love Ran. I love, what is it called? Something Fortress, Hidden Fortress. Kurosawa's a genius, or at least I shouldn't say that, because I've said I won't give aesthetic evaluations of movies. I love his movies. I really enjoy his movies. All right, so that covers kind of the difference between Islam and Christianity. No, the Nazis, somebody asking, did the Nazis admire Islam? No, the Islamists admired the Nazis, but no, the Nazis didn't admire Islam. Maybe they admired the warlike nature of Islamic civilizations in the past, but I don't think the Nazis admire Islam. The Nazis figured out that they could use the Muslims in order to help them take the Middle East. That was their hope. Their hope was to cultivate the Muslims. They cultivated certainly the Palestinians, the leader of the Palestinians in that era, and they hoped to use them because the Nazis wanted the Middle East for the oil. So that's why they went to North Africa. That's why they're heading towards Egypt and ultimately to Saudi Arabia. That's why they were trying to come in from the north through Russia and the Caucasus to Iran and ultimately Iran and Saudi Arabia, because they wanted oil. They knew in order to take over the world, they'd have to have those oil reserves. So they cultivated the Muslims for that. I don't think they admired Islam. Or at least I've never seen any evidence of that. All right, wow, time has just flown. Okay, let me cover a few of these because I promised to do some of this Twitter stuff. But you guys keep throwing money at me, so, I'm blinded by money. Let me find these questions one second, sorry. There they are. All right. Wait, I've got to do this. Got to do that. I've got to do this. Okay, let me do this. So here's one. Again, these are from relatively new people writing to me on Twitter. In many of your lectures, podcasts, and Q&As, you argue that American manufacturing jobs aren't being lost because of cheap labor in places like China, Indonesia, Vietnam, but rather that automation is the root cause of the decline of jobs in this industry. Absolutely, unequivocally. Something like 80 to 90% of all job losses in manufacturing are a consequence of technology, automation. Given that rationale, my question is as follows. Is there a point at which automation becomes so efficient that it completely trumps the practicality of human labor in any field industry, creating large unemployment? If this point does exist, would you be in favor of some sort of UBI? So no, I don't think this point exists. I've covered this in previous talks. You can find it on the podcast. Just look for robots. I've covered it in a few places. So search my podcast just for the word robot. I've covered this point extensively. But no, I think because human needs are infinite, because human wants are infinite, because our desires are infinite, we will always have something more that we want. And we will always find the things, whoops, we will always, okay, here again. So no, I don't think there's a finite number of jobs. I think there's an infinite number of jobs. So I think that there's human needs, wants, desires are infinite. So there's always going to be work that we want done by human beings, because there's certain things that there will always be things that humans can do. Now, at some point, we'll do something and then computers or robots will catch up, and then we'll do something else and robots will catch up. It's constantly striving forward, but there's constantly stuff to be done. There's constantly places to go. There's constantly things to do. And you know, I can't imagine the jobs of 50 years from now, but that's not the point. The point is that the market creates. I did a show on March 2017, thanks Mark, called The Robots Are Coming. And so look for that. March 2017, The Robots Are Coming, where I cover this in great depth. But there really is, I really don't think this is an issue. There's this whole thing about transhumanism, and I don't know what transhumanism is, but I don't necessarily in the future think of robots as separate from human beings. I really don't think that's the case. I think that we will enhance ourselves with robots. So I think that AI will be something that we will be able to access directly from our brain, and it will become part of our thinking process. So I don't think it's this duality long term. I think long term you'll see some kind of combination of human and computer. I don't believe in singularity. I don't think that life is a consequence of ones and electrons. Now maybe I'm wrong, but I just don't see it. So I don't believe computers can become conscious. I think there's some element that is life, it's a biological phenomena. It's not an electronic phenomena, and biology can't just be broken down into bytes and into electrons, as far as I can tell. And then there's a whole question of consciousness. So you have to be alive to be conscious. Computers are not alive, and then they're not conscious, so you'd have to make them alive and then conscious. I don't think you'd have consciousness without life. So I don't know. But my point is, because you could create biological robots, my point is ultimately that I think that the differences will dissolve. There's an interesting show just for fun, right? That you can watch. I'm on season 3 now, called Humans. It's a British show about robots that gain consciousness. It's kind of interesting. We'll see where it goes, but it's kind of interesting. But no, I don't think there's ever a shortage of work. If you think about the number of jobs that exist today on the planet Earth, the numbers are in the billions. There weren't, 250 years ago, there were only, less than 500 million people on the planet. And today, there are many, many more jobs than all the people that were on. And most of those people on Earth 250 years ago didn't have jobs. They worked as subsistence farmers, but today they are jobs, production. So there's no end to our imagination. There's no end to what we can do and what we can produce. Okay, somebody's asking if I'm going to do a John Oliver Iran show in the future. I've tried with John Oliver both on Iran and on Venezuela, and I keep running the thing, and it's like I'd have to really edit his show because some of it's really funny, legitimately funny. Some of it's true, some of it's complete bullshit, and I don't want to play everything and comment on what, but it's interspersed. It's not one sequence of no, this is all bullshit, and it's very hard. So I haven't quite figured out yet how to do John Oliver, how to critique John Oliver. I'll keep working on it. I'll keep trying to figure out because there's a lot of stuff that John Oliver does that would be good to critique. But it's partially a problem of humor, of how to critique something that's funny. Anyway, I'll figure it out. I'm still working on it, but so far, no success. All right. Again, check out my show for March 2017. The robots are coming. Where I cover all this stuff and a lot of other stuff. So there's a lot. Okay. Okay, this is about gentrification. So historically, he says, the person writing this, I've identified as being on the left. However, I find myself undergoing an ideological shift, and many of my views are rapidly changing. This is one issue that I have difficulty wrestling with. From an objective stance, poorer communities being transformed into economically productive neighborhoods should be a good thing. Yeah, absolutely. But this is usually accompanied by the removal, displacement of minorities and the destruction of those communities. Is it possible to transform communities economically without displacing the native population? Or am I looking at this issue from the wrong perspective? Yeah, you're looking at it from the wrong perspective. You're looking at it from the perspective of a collective. What is the value of a community, and why isn't the community better off for the fact that parts of it are being gentrified? That is, in parts of it are now safer, parts of it are now there are people with good jobs and who are educated, who maybe clean up the streets more and who bring culture with them. So why wouldn't the poor population benefit from that if it had the right attitude? So I think gentrification is a wonderful thing that should be embraced by the individuals who happen to be poor living in that neighborhood as a way to improve their own neighborhood. Now, there are two ways in which these people could be removed from the area. One is if they're renting, and look, if you're renting, and somebody can sell the property under you, and you lose your rent, right? You have no property rights over the rent other than the contract you have. So yeah, so they're removed. But the other way is if the local people own the property, and then if it's being gentrified, then the prices are going up. So they're actually making money on the gentrification, and hopefully that money will allow them to improve their lives in some way down the road. So I don't know who the loser here is as a result of gentrification. The neighborhoods become better. The gentrification doesn't happen all at once. It happens in stages. So everybody benefits from those stages. And to the extent that the people who are buying property are raising prices, the people who are selling the property are benefiting from that. And if the people who are selling the property are the people who live in it, who own it, they're better off. Yeah, so some people are renting, and now the rents are going to be too expensive, or now the property's been sold and they can't rent anymore. Okay, but you don't have a right to live in a rental place forever. And then what's the value of these communities, right? They're poor. Many of them are violence-ridden and have drugs. So maybe breaking up these communities is not a bad thing. And why should we have communities that are all one race or one color, whatever the hell race means? Why shouldn't we start mixing up? I mean, wouldn't that be a beautiful thing? Isn't that a step towards Martin Luther King's dream of a colorblind society, which I share? So I would like to see us getting away from this idea of minorities. Who the hell cares if you're a minority or not a minority? The smallest minority on earth is the individual. So you have to change your perspective from a collective perspective, looking at communities and neighborhoods, to an individualist perspective. You as an individual want to buy a townhouse in a bad part of town because you can get it real cheap or relatively cheap, and then you can put some money into it and make it better, providing jobs, by the way, while you're doing that, and live there and live amongst people who are different than you because they might be socially economically different, they might be minorities, whatever. That's your choice as an individual. Why is it anybody's business that you're doing that? And then on the other flip side, somebody's selling you the property, somebody's moving out. It's their choice. It's their decision. Hopefully, and I think this actually happens, gentrification creates opportunities for everybody. So again, the approach should be individualistic, not to look at communities, neighborhoods, but to look at individuals and the benefit of it. And are there any rights being there are no rights being violated with gentrification. I think gentrification is a beautiful thing. So somebody's asking me what my views are on Sam Seder and Young Turks. I don't have a view. I don't know them. I mean, I know the Young Turks are very left. I know that Dave Rubin was part of the Young Turks. Very left comedy news gig type thing. I've never really watched them. I don't know them, and I don't know who Sam Seder is. So if you think I should watch Sam Seder, I'll watch him and then get back to you on it. But that's what it is. Somebody says somebody's calling me utopian. I don't know what is utopian about what I just said about gentrification. I mean, we have to change the way we think about these things, and the people there need to change the way they think about these things. I'm not saying they have changed their way, but the fact is that you should look at the world from an individualist perspective, not from a collectivist perspective. And to the extent that you look at the world from a collectivist perspective, it hurts you and it hurts everybody around you. So I think gentrification is a good thing to the extent, ultimately people start thinking in terms of individualistic way of thinking about it. But gentrification is good because it's an improvement in the neighborhood. The neighborhood is improved. And some people stay, some people move, but the neighborhood is better. Somebody says, look at what's happening in London. But London's not because of gentrification. Crime is up in London for a very simple reason, because the British government, in its wisdom, has dramatically cut budget for police. And they've cut the number of police in the streets. They've gone away from community policing, which was very successful in England. They don't prosecute crimes. They are hugely lenient. They allow prisoners out of jail fairly early for violent crimes, and they've got a massive immigrant population that has no concept of the rule of law and has to be taught. And the only way to do that is to have significant police presence and to insist on assimilation. And the first step of assimilation is respect for the law. So crime in London is going up because of lack of assimilation, but part of that is because there is not enough police. And Theresa May, who's the Prime Minister now, was the minister responsible for the dramatic cuts in policing that happened a few years ago. And when you have dramatic cuts in the number of police, it doesn't increase crime immediately, but you almost always expect crime to increase in a few years. And I think now they're hiring more police and they're ramping up, but it's too late for right now. That'll benefit it in the future. But there's always been immigrants coming into London. So I think the difference is that in the past, those immigrants were expected to assimilate and certainly expected to abide by British law. And there were police there to enforce it, and now they're not. So I know that part of the reason they don't enforce the laws is because they're afraid of being accused of racism, but that's tough. You have to abide by the law. You've got a conservative government in England, so you guys should drop the PC and just do it. Somebody wrote, "Unless you're Tommy Robinson," I think that's right. So the law is enforced when there's political incentive to enforce the law, and the law is not enforced when there isn't. But there's a shortage of police in London, and then there's a tolerance for immigrants that just shouldn't exist. And And that is not a problem of third world people. It's a problem of expectations. When you expect people to assimilate and demand that they assimilate and prosecute them to the full extent of the law, to the extent that they violate your laws, then the world looks very different than if you turn a blind eye to the crimes that they commit because they're immigrants. I mean, that's just nuts. It's just absurd. But that's what's happening. That's what's happening. So yeah, somebody asked, Catherine asked, do you think multiculturalism is the root cause of them not enforcing